Welcome to the Menttium Matters podcast, where we talk about leadership, life, and the transformative power of mentoring. I'm Sylvia Brown, and I am thrilled to have Tony Meale as my guest today. Tony is an author, ghostwriter, speaker, and coach who has worked with leaders and executives for more than a decade, crafting written and spoken content on their behalf. His clients have worked for some of the biggest companies in the world and have bylines in The Athletic, Forbes, Newsweek, and more than a dozen newspapers, including the Washington Post. Tony has also coached leaders from solo entrepreneurs to Fortune 500 CEOs on goal setting, achievement, and getting the most out of their teams. And he helps professionals at all levels find clarity, solve problems, and pivot with purpose along their career journey. A former sports writer, Tony has a master's degree in journalism from Ohio University and narrated a short film about his book, The Chosen Ones, the team that beat LeBron for ESPN in 2022. He is based in Chicago, leads executive communications for a Fortune 250, and is passionate about helping leaders understand the connection between culture and performance and getting the most out of their teams. In this episode, we will discuss how to pivot with purpose in your career, and Tony will share three of the top lessons from his book, which he has turned into a keynote speech on leadership, culture, and team building. Welcome, Tony.
Hi, Solvig. Nice to be with you. How are you?
I am good. I'm so happy to have you as a guest today. Tony, you've made a habit of evolving with the times, thinking outside the box, and taking calculated risks to advance your career. Can you walk us through some of the pivots you've made? I think there are a lot of really great lessons in your journey that our audience would find very relatable.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I went right from undergrad to grad school, and I entered the workforce in 2008, right as the financial crisis was taking shape. And in my first 6 weeks post grad, I applied for probably 100 jobs in journalism, didn't hear back from anyone. And finally, I wound up emailing the local editor at the newspaper and just saying, "Hey, I'm a recent grad. Do you need help? Do you need anything? I'll work for free. I'll fetch coffee. I'll do whatever." And he eventually, he actually responded and said, "Well, we can't have you work for free. That's illegal. But we actually have an opening for a sports writer. Why don't you interview, send me your resume?" And so I did. Wound up getting that job. And I was making $22,000 a year. And I thought I had won the lottery. But shortly after that, reality kind of set in. There were pay freezes, there were furloughs, there were layoffs. The writing was on the wall very early in print journalism and during that time especially. And I kind of knew after about 6 months that what I was doing was not sustainable long term. And I wound up being at the paper for almost 3 years. But there were so many standout moments during that time. I remember I was about to cover. I was on my way to cover a high school football game one night, and I stopped at Chipotle to have dinner before working that night. And I remember thinking to myself, "Wow, the cost of my dinner was an hour's worth of work." And I just thought to myself, how am I ever gonna, make enough money to move out of my mom's house and all this kind of stuff? And it was just kind of a rough time. And so during that job, I had certain responsibilities. I had to write 8 stories a week and interview athletes and get photos at games, tweet. I was kind of this one man person, this one man band, and I was covering high school sports. And but I was somebody who I was always wanting to do more. I was trying to find ways to stand out, and I was eager to grow my career. And so Cincinnati produces a lot of college and professional athletes, and so anytime one of those athletes was in the news and maybe they were from a high school that we were covering, I would try to do a column and do columns on college sports, pro sports. And I did a couple of them, and it seemed like they were doing very well. But eventually, my editor said to me, "Hey, I need you to cool it with those columns for a while." And I just said, "Oh, like are they not doing well? Are they is the engagement not doing well?" And she basically explained that they were actually doing quite well, but if the higher ups noticed that I had all this time to do work that went beyond the scope of my job, it meant that we were probably going to have a layoff in the sports department. And so I think I understood the logic and I thought she's probably right. But I think that just really hammered home this idea of I don't want to be somewhere in a field, in an industry where hard work, creativity, drive, where those were seen as liabilities. And one day in 2011, I was about 2.5 years into my tenure at the paper. I came across this article about this high school basketball team in Pennsylvania that almost beat Kobe Bryant when in the state title game when Kobe was a senior. And it got me thinking about the Roger Bacon team from Cincinnati, where I'm from, Cincinnati, Ohio, who did beat LeBron in the state final matchup in 2002. And I was the same high school age as LeBron. I knew who he was when he was still just kind of this statewide wonder, as opposed to the global icon that he, of course, became. And Roger Bacon was actually a rival school of mine. So I was kind of following them that year up close and personal. And I knew they had a chance. But when they actually beat LeBron when I was 16 years old in 2002, I just thought, wow, they actually did it. I can't believe it. But it's going to be time. It's going to take years before people realize just how impressive this is. And as it turned out, they were the only Ohio team to ever beat LeBron. He went 81-1 against in-state competition in his career. And so, as it turns out, I knew the 10-year anniversary of the game was coming up. And so I went in about 20 minutes. I decided I was going to leave my job to write a book on this. And so I did.
Wow, that is amazing. But like what you were saying, you could see how things were evolving. I like when you said I didn't want to be in a position where my creativity and drive was hindered because it didn't look good. So that's incredible how that idea just came about. So tell me about that pivot. So you're in this job and then all of a sudden you're like, I'm going to write a book. So what happened there?
Yeah, I really saw the book as a way to sort of stand out in my career. And so, the book came out, there was all kinds of media coverage, and I went ahead and self-published it. People said, it's going to be tough. You're not going to get into bookstores. You don't have a snowball's chance, and you know what, of getting into Barnes and Noble, bookstores like that. I wound up getting into Barnes and Noble. I still have the uh, the purchase order they sent me. So that was kind of a cool moment, and some relatively well-known sports writers, in the field nationally, they offered testimonials for the book. It was in Slam magazine. So that was kind of this really cool thing. And I spent 7, 8, 9 months promoting the book, doing guest speaking engagements, book signings, author appearances, and all that. But in early 2013, it was kind of what now? And so I remember I woke up on New Year's Day 2013. At that point, I was living with my mom and my sister still, and I walked down the hall for breakfast, and I sat down with them. And I had been home at that point for maybe 4 or 5 years. Kind of a long story. My parents got divorced when I was senior in college, and I wanted to kind of be home with them for a couple years after that. And plus, again, I wasn't making much money at the paper, so it was just kind of a rough time for people in general back then. But I walked down the hall and I sat down for breakfast, and I said, I love you both, but this will be my last New Year's Day breakfast in this house. And they said, What do you mean? What are you talking about?" And I said, I'm not sure if I'm moving across town or if I'm moving across the country, but at this time next year, I will not be living in this house. And so that May, I wound up moving to Chicago kind of on a whim, signed a 2-month lease, and it's 12 years later, and I'm still in the Chicago area. I wound up meeting my wife in Chicago, and my career really kind of took off after that. And I got a chance to try different types of writing, but it was really in 2014, kind of a long story how this came about, but I got an opportunity to ghostwrite, which I had never done, for a dean of education about higher education policy, which I knew nothing about. And so, for those first couple of assignments, the dean and I would have these calls, and she would tell me, here's what I want, here's what I need. It's a speech on this and editorial on that. And for those first couple of assignments, I mean, that was kind of our process. And she actually had very few changes to the copy that I created. And so I kind of thought to myself, maybe there's something here, because just in full transparency, at that time, I was this late 20s white guy. She was mid 50s, black, female. I mean, there were these demographic divides. And I thought, if I can pick up her voice this quickly about a topic I know nothing about, maybe there's something here for me. And for the next 6 years, that's really how I marketed myself as a ghostwriter. And I had a chance to work with athletes, leaders, executives in all different industries. And kind of being an industry novice was kind of my selling point that whole time. And I would tell new clients, hey, I don't know your field. You're super intelligent. Let me bridge the gap between your expertise and the audiences you're trying to reach. And so I would say, talk to me like I'm five. I mean, there was no ego in it. Whatever you think is super basic for your area, totally fine. Just talk to me like I'm a small child, and we'll go from there. And so that was what I did for the next 6 years, ghostwriting. And that's what I'm still doing now.
That is such a fascinating pivot, using the skill that you developed working at the newspaper and finding a totally new and creative way for it to pay the bills and to really be successful in your career. So how long did you do that for? And then when did you decide to pivot from that?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many great parallels between ghostwriting and journalism in terms of writing and researching and asking questions and just being a sponge. And, in journalism, you're writing for your readers, and ghostwriting, you're writing for a specific audience. So there's just so many natural parallels. But in 2020, COVID hit, the pandemic hit. I actually wound up, losing the dean of education as a client, due to some university budget cuts. As you probably recall, that was a tough time for everyone again. And so at that point, I had been self employed for 10 years. And, I took a moment to pause and reflect. I had just gotten married a few months prior. My wife is self employed. I knew kids were going to happen eventually. And I thought, it's been a great 10 years, but traditional benefits, as we expand our family would really be nice. And so I got on LinkedIn one day in late 2020, just poking around to see what was there job wise. I found an ad for a job and I read it. It was kind of a compilation of what I had done for my freelance clients over the previous 6 years. And the guy that married my wife and I, he was our officiant. He worked at the company, always raved about it. And I thought, I'm just going to go ahead and apply. It's in the financial services industry. And somehow, I mean, I was basically reading credit cards and banking for dummies before the interview. I mean, not really, but kind of. Somehow I got that job. It was the only one I applied for. I started there in early 2021, and I've been there, for the last 4 years. And so it was really interesting to go from being this freelance, this self-employed writer, and you're working remotely for all of these clients, and you get to kind of peek behind the curtain of a lot of industries. So doing that was phenomenal, but then sort of being in house at a Fortune 250 and working directly with the CEO and his team, and really kind of seeing how decisions get made. It was kind of this new experience that's been just so valuable for me. And so just having over 10 years now working with leaders and seeing how they operate, it's just been very helpful.
That is such a fascinating career journey. And I like that you know each moment when to pivot. We know when the time is right. It's like you read the signals or you think about what you're looking for in your life. So, Tony, there's a lot of uncertainty right now in many industries, as we've touched upon. Can you offer suggestions on how to navigate that? And for our listeners that may be torn between pivoting, doubling down, or perhaps starting over altogether, what would your advice be?
Yeah, I would say I would want to know a few things. First, why do you feel a change is needed? Are you unhappy with your pay or your title? Are you having issues with your boss or your colleagues? Do you feel stagnant or like you're not being challenged? Do you want to work for a bigger company, a smaller company? What's causing this angst and making you feel like something is missing? And is there anything we can do to change or improve it? That's number one. Number two is I'd want to know, where are you in life? And to the comment you just made, I mean, we often think of our personal and professional journeys as separate, but the reality is they're completely connected. I mean, who I am today as a married father of two approaching 40 is not who I was when I was 24, 25, when I was young and desperate and losing sleep at night trying to think of ways to advance my career. I spoke at a lot of colleges and universities after the book came out, and I would say, don't take your 20s for granted. I mean, you graduate and you think you have all this time, but the older you get, the more responsibilities you tend to have. I would tell students, I left my job at 26 to write a book. What if I had waited 10 years? What if I were 36 with a wife, a kid, and a mortgage? And the crazy thing is, as it turned out, at 36, I had all three. And so that's not to say that you can't pursue your ambitions once you turn 30 or 35, but you have to be more intentional about it, and you have to always see the bigger picture. So, if you're contemplating a major life transition, whether it's changing jobs or careers, moving across the country, leaving Wall Street to open a coffee shop, whatever you're thinking about doing, think about what your entire life would look like if you made that change. Do you have other people you need to account for, like a spouse or children? How would it impact your friendships or work life balance? Where are you financially? Do you have big life events coming up? I mean, there are all sorts of things to consider. So when determining what you want professionally, you also have to assess where you are personally. And the last thing I would say is think about which way the winds are blowing in terms of the economy and your industry. Beyond determining what you want to do you have the skills to do it? Is there a market for it? If you want to open a blockbuster in 2025, that's probably not going to end well. But do you want to start a YouTube channel? Okay, great. I mean, do you have the equipment? Are you comfortable on camera? Are you engaging on camera? Do you know how to video edit? Are you good with headlines and SEO? If you are, that's fantastic. If you're not, are you willing to learn? Because that's the big thing. A lot of people say they want to do XYZ, but then when they see all that's involved, they don't want to do it anymore. So if you find yourself unwilling to put the work in to get where you think you want to be, odds are you probably don't want to go there.
That is great advice on how to look at everything happening in your life, looking at that personally, and then looking at the broader pictures. And I feel that um, your suggestion to really understand what's expected of the pivot you're thinking of making is huge because a lot of times, like you said, there's a lot of hidden work, time that people don't know, or some aspects of it might be not what you're looking for. But those are great ideas. So you have turned your book, The Chosen Ones, The Team That Beat LeBron, into a keynote speech on leadership, culture, and team building. What are the top three leadership lessons people can learn from Coach Bill Brewer, who led Roger Bacon to the historic state title win? And for our readers that may not be familiar with the story, I mean, sorry, for our listeners that may not be familiar with the story, can you just give us a little background on these teams? I watched your ESPN documentary that you narrated, and it was fascinating. I am so excited to read the book, but just kind of frame where this is at and why this was just truly a historic event.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. So Roger Bacon is a co-ed Catholic high school in Cincinnati. They had a really good basketball team in the early 2000s. Same time that LeBron, of course, was starring at Akron St. Vincent St. Mary. And Roger Bacon wound up playing LeBron's team in the regular season in late 2001. They lost that game, but it was very close, went down to the final minutes. They wound up getting a rematch with LeBron in the state final in March of 2002. This was about a month after LeBron appeared on the cover of Sports Illustrated with the words "The Chosen One," and that's kind of what he's been known as ever since. And so at that point, LeBron was just sort of this rock star. I mean, everybody knew who he was. You know, he was going to be the next Michael Jordan. He was invincible. And then somehow Roger Bacon wound up beating him. And I will say it's kind of it's a bittersweet story in the sense that Roger Bacon was led by this coach Bill Brewer, this very old school, hard nosed, tough person. And he won that historic game in 2002. Very sadly, he wound up passing away a couple of years later in his early 40s. It was in 2007. Left behind a wife and three daughters. And so a lot of his players actually, when they played for Bill, they didn't like him because he was tough, he was demanding. It took them a couple years to realize how special he was and that he had their best interest at heart. And he taught them so many lessons beyond basketball. And they probably don't beat LeBron if not for the focus and discipline that he instilled in them throughout that year. So as the players kind of reflect on that accomplishment, which is more than 20 years ago now, there is still kind of that lingering sadness that a lot of them weren't able to tell Bill thank you and just how much they meant to him. But now there's just widespread appreciation, admiration for him and all he did for them as their coach and their leader.
So I love that you were able to look at that, interview these players, look at the trajectory of that, and then take out the leadership lessons, which to the players at the time weren't necessarily obvious. They were just like, "This is our coach." And so, what did you learn from Bill, this coach? This is amazing, Bill Brewer.
Sure. Well, I would say that the number one thing that Bill did that all leaders should do is communicate expectations. So if you're a leader, if you're new to a team, you have to convey the expectations to your team. At the start of every season, Bill gave his players a one pager outlining everything he expected of them. Be early, not just on time, to all team functions. I mean, it covered his expectations for practice, on game days, how you would conduct yourself in the classroom, in your personal life, how you would interact with teachers. It covered everything. And at the bottom of the page, it said, following the rules takes discipline, either yours or ours. Get in or get out. And that probably sounds really aggressive relative to most professional working environments in 2025. But for Bill, it was very simple. These are my expectations. Will you commit to them? If yes, you can be on my team. If no, you cannot be on my team. It's really that simple. So, from a business standpoint, if you lead people, what's your level set? What are you doing to convey expectations to your team? Communication is literally the most important aspect of leadership. How can someone follow you if they don't know what you stand for? So, you have to set ground rules. This is how we're going to go about things. This is what I expect of you. This is what I need of you. A lot of leaders don't do this, and then they're frustrated with certain team members or the team dynamic in general in terms of how they collaborate or go about things. Leaders think, well, this isn't what I want. Well, how can people give you what you want if they don't know what you need? It's your job to get everyone on the same page and moving in the same direction as one. And that's something that Bill did better than anyone.
I love that because as when you're working for someone, you want to know what the expectations are. And I think that a lot of times leaders may just assume that people know, or, people may think they understand what the leader's saying if it hasn't been communicated explicitly. So I love that idea for just making sure everyone knows what's expected of them, what's expected of the team, and nothing is too small to say these are the expectations. So what's after that? What's the second one? So communicate expectations is first and foremost. What's the next leadership lesson from Coach Bill Brewer?
So when it comes to driving culture and setting tone, there's this age-old debate in sports about whether coaches should treat all their players the same. In my opinion, in sports and definitely in business, you cannot treat everyone the same, but you have to discipline everyone the same. And the reason you can't treat everyone the same is because everyone is at different stages and everyone has different motivations. I mean, show me a random team in corporate America and you're probably going to have a young professional fresh out of college who's just happy to be there and eager to learn anything and everything. You're going to have someone probably approaching retirement who could be checked out or all in, depending on the circumstances. You're going to have probably a new parent who isn't checking email at 9 o'clock at night because they're in bed exhausted from chasing a toddler around all day. You're going to have someone who's been with the company for 10, 15, 20 years chasing a promotion. I mean, it's going to run the spectrum in terms of the personalities and life stages on your team. And that's before you get into who's on site, who's remote, who's maybe a little sensitive, who needs a little tough love. I mean, leading a team is not easy. There's all these dynamics you have to navigate before you even get to the actual work. So you cannot treat everyone the same, but you have to discipline them the same. Bill had a rule that I referenced earlier: be early, not just on time, to all team functions. I mean, that was his number one rule on the list. And as a follow up to that, he expected varsity players to be at the gym on game nights, seated in time for tip off of the JV game. Well, one night, three of Roger Bacon's starting players were a few minutes late to the JV game. They were driving to the game together, they got stuck behind a train, and they knew they were going to be late. So they tried to enter the gym through the back entrance, hoping Bill wouldn't see them. Well, it didn't work. They sat in the stands, they looked at Bill. He looked at them, looked at his watch, looked back at them from across the floor, and shook his head no. Later that night, before the varsity game, Bill walks into the locker room and he says, "Who wants to start tonight?" And everyone's hands go up. And then he says, "Okay, who wants to start tonight who was on time?" And I mean, the three starters, their hands went down and they couldn't believe it. I mean, this was a huge game. Number one versus number two in the city. Division One scouts had traveled to attend the game to see if anyone was worthy of a college scholarship. I mean, it would have been so easy for Bill to just let this slide, but he didn't. Not only did those three players not start, Bill sat them for the entire first quarter in a game that Roger Bacon wound up winning. I mean, most coaches, they would have said, okay, it's fine. Give me some laps tomorrow. We're good. But for Bill, it was about the bigger picture. And he knew what all leaders should know. If you don't enforce rules when you should, you lose credibility. So if you say you want people on site 3 days a week, but certain people don't do it and it isn't addressed, guess what? No one's going to do it. If you say you want open collaboration on your team, but you have someone who's very secretive and territorial and doesn't play well with others, that's a problem. If you say you want a positive professional working environment, but there's a team member who can be negative or overly critical or perhaps even condescending, that's a problem. These are things that, if left unchecked, will hurt morale, will hurt culture, will diminish you in the eyes of your team, and will prevent your team from achieving its goals.
Those are great parallels. And spelling it out like that, it seems like it makes it easier to be consistent, knowing that, okay, these are the rules and everyone will get the same discipline. And then I love the idea that you treat everyone differently depending on what their needs are, what their personality is, where they are at in their career. Because, like you said, everyone is coming from a different space and they appreciate the leaders that can meet them where they're at. That is fabulous advice.
Yeah, and I will say, all of the bench players, I mean, they still remember that moment like it was yesterday. They said it was the most respectful thing they had ever seen in terms of a coach doing that in a game that big and making sure that his star players follow the rules.
Oh, right. I love that you got their perspective as well. Even though it was hard, they're just like, no, he was impeccable with his word. He said this is what's going to happen, and that's what happened. Even when it probably would have been easier to let the starters play when it was such a big game and all the scouts were
Absolutely.
in the audience. Okay, what's the third leadership lesson that you learned from Coach Bill?
Yeah, as the leader, you have to give honest feedback. In sports, athletes typically want more. In basketball, if you're not starting, you want to start, and if you're starting but not the leading scorer, you want more opportunities to score. You want to shoot more. And so Bill would tell players, if you're not happy with your playing time, your role, whatever it is, come talk to me. My door is always open. And when players did that, when they would ask, why am I not starting? Why am I not getting more minutes? Bill would tell them, because you can't shoot, because you can't dribble, because you're a liability on defense. Some coaches might say, well, just keep working on your game, keep practicing. We'll look to get you in here and there. For Bill, there was none of that. It was, this is where you need to improve, put the work in, get better. So, from a business standpoint, whether it's an annual review or it's a weekly one on one, when someone asks for feedback and they want to know where they can improve or why they aren't getting certain opportunities, tell them. I mean, let them know what they need to work on. Don't say something just to make them feel good. Say something that will make them better at what they do. You don't have to be as blunt as Bill, and I'd probably recommend not being as blunt as Bill was, but be real with folks. If you shy away from the truth, even when you're asked for it, it doesn't help your employees and it doesn't help your team. Help people grow and develop. They want to. Tell them where they need to improve and then empower them to do so.
How have you given leaders that you've worked with help in doing this? I've talked to so many people where this is really hard for them. It's hard to give honest feedback. What would be your suggestion if you have a personality where it doesn't come naturally to you? How have you coached people through being able to do it more effectively?
Yeah, I have found that leaders tend to find these conversations very uncomfortable. One thing that can help is sort of using the sandwich approach where you lead with the positive, then you kind of give your ask or the constructive criticism where the behavior needs improved, and then you close with a positive. I really appreciate how you do XYZ. Here's an area that I think could be better, and if you do that, I think it's going to help you. It's going to help the team. In the example of, maybe there's a person on the team who you want them to collaborate with others and bring people in, but maybe they're just a little territorial. Maybe the hand on the wheel is a little tight. I think you sit down with them and you ask them, "Are you aware that you're not being as collaborative as I want?" It's possible they might not even realize it, but if they do realize it, if it is intentional, ask them why that is. What's going on? Why are you afraid of bringing in so and so? Why are you feeling, whether it's insecure, whatever it might be? Like, what are your concerns here? And then encourage them to sort of fix or correct that behavior and give them a chance to do so. Hopefully they do. If not, then further action is probably going to be needed. It could be a situation where you have to maybe take something off their plate. If they're not going to bring in others and share the plate, maybe you've got to take something away. And then maybe that's a learning lesson for them where they think, okay, I do need to change behaviors, because if not, I'm gonna lose control of the things I enjoy doing.
That is great advice on how to be specific and how to almost like get underneath the problem and to ask questions like, are you aware of this? Did you know this, and that's really, really great. Tony, we have time for one final question. What would your advice be to up and coming leaders?
Yeah, there are so many things, but I think the number one thing I would say is understand that your team doesn't serve you, you serve them. Their purpose is not to make you look good. Your purpose is to help them grow and develop and achieve their goals. That means giving them opportunities to shine, praising them when they perform well, and giving credit where credit is due. Early in my career, during a team meeting, I pitched an idea to my boss who took it and ran with it and presented it to the higher ups. And about a month later, they approved it. I executed it, and it wound up being very successful. Unfortunately, I had no interaction with the higher ups during this time, and they had no idea who I was or even that the idea was mine. And as it turned out, there wound up being some disagreement as to whose idea it was and who deserved credit for it. So that taught me a couple of valuable lessons early in my career. Number one, if you have an idea, pitch it in writing so there's no confusion as to whose it is. And two, if your leader isn't willing to give you the credit or visibility, even on things you pitch and execute that are successful, you need to find a new leader because they do not have your best interest in mind. As a leader, you have to be very intentional about how you conduct yourself, how you give employees opportunities, how you praise them, how you develop them. Because, big picture, you might control what your employees work on day to day, but they don't serve you, you serve them.
That is great, great, great advice. Tony, I wish I could talk to you all day. This is so interesting. And thank you so much for joining us today. This has been incredibly valuable. And I know our listeners got a lot out of our conversation.
It's been
For
great. Thank
any
you so much.
Yeah, it's wonderful. For anyone who wants to reach out to Tony to book him as a speaker, to hire him as a ghostwriter, a coach, to buy a copy of his book, please visit his website, tonymeale.com. That's TonyMeale.com. Tony, thank you again. And thank you all for listening to this episode of the Menttium Matters podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with friends and colleagues. We have many great guests lined up and look forward to having you join us again next time.